It was announced on Saturday by the IDF that they had rescued 4 of the hostages that Hamas has held ever since the tragedy of October 7th. The 4 hostages who were rescued were Noah Argamani, Al-Magmir, Andrei Kozlov, and Shlomo Ziv. And obviously, this is near miraculous news. The family and friends and everyone who knows them, as well as many people who do not, must have considered that like a pipe dream at this point, that actual living hostages would be recovered after so many months. And that's nothing compared to how the hostages must feel. I mean, they've been there for the better part of a year. I was saying in our production meeting, 10 minutes of what they endured would be almost unimaginable for me and probably for anyone listening to this. So to be released must be a feeling beyond anything that can be put into words. And now I want to talk about how I learned this news, because like many people, I saw an article about this and saw that 4 hostages had been rescued. Again, miraculous, amazing. And I read it because I want to know the details. And so I read it, and I read the headline, and then I started reading the story, and I read on and on and on. And very low down, I saw, during the mission, maybe 100 Palestinians were killed, which seems like a big aspect of this, but you really had to read into it to see that. Turns out it was over 200, actually, we eventually find out. And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says, we may never know how many people who died. We may never know what the breakdown was of actual people either in Hamas or linked to Hamas, but we know that many of them were civilians, women and children who were killed. Now, the fact that the initial reporting hid the fact that many people had died for innocents, had died for each of the hostages that were again miraculously saved, that received some backlash. And by now, when we're going live, the articles are acknowledging it, and it's a much bigger part of the conversation. But in the moment, it was maybe the greatest crystallization of the relative value of human life that I've ever seen from the point of view of the media. They made clear in those headlines that certain lives are worth dozens of times more than others. I have always been burdened by a belief that all human life is precious. Those hostages' lives are precious, and their families deserve to get them back. And it is a miracle that they were recovered. But the fact that dozens of civilians were killed for every hostage that was returned seems like that should necessarily have been a big part of this story from moment one. And it's weird that it wasn't. There's a lot of other details, but Francesca, I know this is a story you've been thinking a lot about throughout the weekend. What do you make of this?
Yeah, this is not a success. I think you cannot frame this as a success and still say that you believe in human rights, period. Obviously, those hostages deserve to be returned, but 275, mostly civilians, women and children, did not deserve to be murdered. Do you think they're gonna see their family members ever again? You think they're gonna embrace them? You think that CNN's gonna do exposés about them and their loved ones? No. You think we're gonna know their names? No. And so, look, this entire thing is, I mean, I have long, done away with the hope of any real investigation to what happened. But it seems like this was a special team, an operation where they went into a refugee camp, Al-Nusrayat, and the IDF did in order to free hostages. And the rescue mission didn't go so well. This was according to the BBC very recently, that didn't go so well. And so, because it wasn't going well and they were coming under fire, they decided to rain fire from the skies. And so they decided to barrage a refugee camp with missiles in order to get some of the hostages out. Now, it seems like I believe one hostage might have actually been killed in this operation. But so this is militarily, humanitarily, none of this is a success at all. The only actual success for freeing hostages in this 8-month genocide was in November, when Israel and Hamas came to the table and they were able to exchange, speaking of the relativity of life, John, 50 Israeli hostages for 150 not Hamas fighters. We're not talking, this is for civilians civilians for civilians. And that's exactly what happened. That was brokered. That was a ceasefire deal. And man, Hamas and Biden have been, and even some in Israel, of course, have been so close to another ceasefire agreement, but no dice. Let's just go in shooting, and under incredibly suspicious terms. It seems like there might have been a humanitarian aid truck that was used as a decoy, and we still don't know about the way the pier that the US built on the shore of Gaza might have also been used in all this.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you covered a lot of those things that still remain outstanding that we don't necessarily know. The nature of the attack too. There was a quote from one of the hostages that said one of the things that they were most scared of while they were being held was the sound of Israeli planes, because they know what that means. They know how likely that is to kill them. And one of the many dark facts of this entire thing is that the IDF has killed many of those hostages, not intentionally, but they've killed many of them. And that is horrific. And just briefly, I want to cover a few other things. You might be wondering, we're going to skip to graphic 3. You might be wondering, what is the State Department going to make of this? The presentation of this is a great success when it has such horrific outcomes. Well, you're going to have to wait a little while to find out, because according to a State Department press briefing schedule leaked to Ken Klippenstein, you're not going to hear much from them for the time being. If we could skip to graphic 3, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, there will be no gaggle for the press, no briefing as well. Maybe on Thursday, we can get to a quote for an interview with them, find out a little bit. But weirdly, they're just not going to make themselves present as we cruise out of the weekend with all that. So obviously that was super convenient for them. Joe Biden put out some initial statements of support for all this.
That is so pathetic. Look, I'm glad that they're not doing any kind of press briefing, because who wants to see them like struggle and squirm? I don't want to see Matt Miller again be grilled by Matt Lee and have no answer. I don't want to see John Kirby up there making a million excuses, basically sounding like Netanyahu's spokesperson. But really, this is on Joe Biden. This is so embarrassing, right? Because Joe Biden last Friday was like, we have a ceasefire deal and it's on Israel. We have to end this right now. And again, the ceasefire deal was for an initial hostage relief, massive hostage release, not 4 people at the expense of 275, right? An actual release, because there was an actual ceasefire. And all that is now dead in the water. Netanyahu once again has flaunted that in front of his face, even though behind closed doors, there was conversation that, yeah, Israel might come to the table on this. So yeah. I'm glad that the administration has the temerity and the self-respect to not go and celebrate in front of the cameras, but also it was pretty weak that he even put out that statement that was like, hey, yay, 4 hostages. No mention of Palestinians dying, no mention of them being murdered and slaughtered and made orphans or motherless or fatherless, so that 4 people who could have been released months ago could be released.
Well, remember, we talked, I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, about a member of the Israeli government that was talking with a group of the families of the hostages and just said, no, we're not gonna accept a ceasefire, even if it means saving all of them. Because, lots of Israeli people want the hostages back, and maybe some in the government too, but many in the government have other goals that are more important, and the continuation of the war is necessary for them. And so when you see news like this, it's like a 2-shot of the horrors of our world. You have the murder of hundreds of innocent people, children and babies being shot, being blown up. Every individual one of those, a tragedy. You have all of that being done. And then you have the realization, there's gonna be a lot of people that have no problem with this whatsoever. There's gonna be a lot of people who like this. And it's both of those things, the action and the reminder of how horrible so many people who share our species are. And so we're now into the media cycle. So what do you think the right wing is gonna say about this? You don't think they're gonna celebrate the bombings? They're gonna celebrate the dead? It's horrible, again.
Because Palestinians aren't human. They're not human for them. I mean,
they're at the very least, they're not nearly as human. They're just not nearly as valuable. And I'll criticize Ben Shapiro when he makes that point later today. But the New York Times effectively made that point first in the way they presented this, okay? 4 humans do have value, and so do hundreds. And how do you stress the 4 and bury the hundreds? literally and figuratively in terms of your news coverage. But it's a choice they make every time. And this is not unique to this conflict. Going back years and years of iterations of this, it is always the way things are presented, okay?
Yes. But I mean, this is the question, John. Like,
Final point goes to you.
Final point, really quickly. Just, you have to ask yourself, right? Like, why are we celebrating the release of these 4 hostages? It's because we're celebrating the military. It's because we're celebrating the military that we support, right? Well, what about Palestinians? They don't have a military, right? They have Hamas fighters. Well, what if they did have a military? What if they had helicopters? What if they had missiles? What if they had, weapons provided from some other big superpower like Russia or wherever, right? What if they had all of that and they went into Israel and they saved their Palestinian hostages, right? Being held in detention centers across Israel right now, being tortured systematically. Who would celebrate that? Would that get the headline of the New York Times because it was a military that was doing a cool operation, and then when it went wrong, they just missiled everybody and they killed a bunch of Israelis? Would that be okay because it's a military? I don't think so.
No.
This is not about who has what, right? This is about whose life is deemed an actual life and who are treated like animals. You need to disappear. You need to be fully colonized. Goodbye.
When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?